Morning everybody. Today we are going to take a quick look at my Saab 95. It's pinging a P0116 error, which seems to be a temperature sender. However, you'll notice that my engine temperature is 106 degrees Celsius, but my temperature gauge has zeroed out entirely. And if I switch it off and then back on again, you'll notice that everything resets. Saab's Trionic 7 system is actually quite intelligent, and if it doesn't detect the vehicle warming up within a certain space of time, then it will actually trigger a faulty temperature sender signal, and this is how it manifests. So if you've got open SID like I've got here, this is a stage 1 map from NoobTune, then you will find that you note 106 degrees Celsius and your temperature gauge basically zeroes out. I thought at first that this was a faulty temp sender, or potentially a fault in the circuit, or potentially a fault in the gauge cluster itself. However, it was displaying 106 degrees. It was barely 50, even after half an hour or an hour of running, moving at fairly high speeds, and I started to suspect the thermostat. Now, I've had thermostats on other cars fail shut before, which obviously causes overheating. Never failed in an open position, which is what I suspect here. So we'll double check what the fault codes are first, just to see what it is. Now, OpenSID gives you an F code, which is essentially a decimal code, which you have to convert into hexadecimal. You can find these on Google. That gives you 116, which is a P0116, and that very simply is engine coolant temperature circuit performance problem. To you and I, that basically just means that something isn't working as expected, or performance that was expected hasn't been reached within a given time. We'll use the Tech2 to just double check on this, mainly because it's the first time that I've actually used the OpenSID to provide a code, and I just want to double check my workings. I've got a Tech2, so might as well put it to good use. So as we're running through, we can see the various aspects of the Trionic 7 system that are being tested for codes, and we'll pull the one that's just come up there under the Trionic 7 just to see which code it is that we get. There you go, P116, engine coolant temperature circuit performance problem. Bang on. So it's nice to know that everything's working, at least from the problem diagnosis or P code position. Now, because I'm feeling a bit spicy, I'm just going to clear the code and we'll deal with the thermostat in just a moment. So the car itself is cold. We'll give it a start up, and using the OpenSID to monitor the engine temperature, I'm just going to wait for it to climb a few degrees and then check on the main radiator pipe, so the one that comes out of the thermostat and goes into the top of the radiator, just to see how warm that gets, because the thermostat itself should only open at a given temperature around 85 degrees Celsius. Therefore, if it's 40 to 45 degrees, which you'll be able to feel quite easily with your hand, clearly the thermostat is leaking internally, or constantly open, or it's failed somehow. So it's a very simple test. So with the car now at above 45 degrees Celsius, we'll identify that top hose, just touch that, it's coming straight out of the thermostat, and that is warm. So evidently that is being fed coolant through from the thermostat, which has failed. So the thermostat, which is underneath that housing that I'm looking at there, that is the one that we're going to have to replace. Now, it's not the most awkward of thermostat housings. In all fairness, there is quite a bit of accessibility behind it, but it's one that you do primarily by feel. So I'm going to film it as best I can so that you guys can see how it all comes apart, and also what I remove in the process. Now, it's underneath that housing. The housing itself is held in with a few bolts, which I'll arrow and identify for you in a bit. But it's really just a case of undoing stuff to give yourself a bit more access, and also making sure that your top hose is in good condition. I'm actually going to replace mine. So I've got a silicone hose with new clamps. Those top hoses are known for rupturing, especially if you're modified. You run a bit more heat, gets quite hot. Anyway, we're going to take that pipe off first. That'll give us a little bit more access. Having undone the clips and undone the mount, now I know I'm running an aftermarket pipe there, but the same principle applies to the plastic one. you just have to undo the top connection. For me, that is just a Jubilee clip there on the very top of the throttle body. Angle for you guys, if you're using a plastic pipe still, then it's just going to be the factory connection. Then you can rotate the pipe out of the way. I'm a big fan of not disconnecting it because it just means that nothing's going to fall down inside the intake tube. And now we've got quite a bit of decent access to the thermostat housing itself. Now obviously this car is still filled with coolant, so that's going to be our next challenge before we remove the hoses. And we are going to, oh look, there's another job for me to do, rusty. Anyway, that green thing that I have pointed out is the coolant drain tap. Now, if, like my car, yours is seized, you're going to have to find a different way to drain the coolant. There are two ways of doing that. You can either drop the coolant out of the lower radiator hose, or you can disconnect the top hose, which is what I did, and drain the coolant through the front, basically down the back of the radiator. It's far less clean, but I did catch the vast majority of it. So make sure that having used your hose clips, you disconnect the hose nicely. There will be a little bit more drains out the radiator there. It is what it is. I'm catching that in a large tray underneath the car at the moment. Turn your attention to the one at the back. Please do buy the proper pliers for this. These are latching pliers or locking pliers, and they grip the tangs on these hose clips perfectly. Now if they're corroded, you might have to Dremel them off, but honestly these make it an absolute dream. Don't use mole grips. Please don't use mole grips. So having removed the clip and levered the old hose off, out it pops. Unless the hose genuinely is in good condition, just get rid of it. And now on to getting this little beauty off. And there are 4 bolts. There are 2 13mm which are arrowed in yellow and 2 10mm which are arrowed in green. One of the 10 mils also has an earth on it. Right, so let's get cracking. For the top mounting bolt, I actually found it a little bit tricky to get the ratchet on there, so I just used a 13mm crank end ring spanner. Right, so with all the bolts removed, you can now remove the thermostat housing. Be prepared to give it a little love tap, since they can really heal on after 15-20 years in situ. Also, that lower bracket is an absolute pain, but don't worry about it, you won't break it. Now, notice the orientation of the jiggle valve or bleeder valve. It just helps bleed the cooling system of any trapped air. It's at the very top of the thermostat, as it's nested into that aperture, so that's really important when you refit the new thermostat. These thermostats are pretty well stuck in, so yeah, go ahead and use a screwdriver to just pry it out. You're not going to reuse it anyway. There are tests that you can do to check whether or not the thermostat is faulty, but I'm fairly confident, so we're going to go ahead and fire the parts cannon. But before we go ahead and fit the new thermostat and the housing back on, I just want to clean up both the mounting faces of the thermostat housing and the face on the block, just using a bit of 00 wire wool on that. And the thermostat housing face also needs a bit of a clean. So checking the old thermostat and the new thermostat look roughly the same. All good there. And there's a little jiggle valve that I was speaking about, which you can see quite clearly there on the new one. So having made sure that the rubber seal is nicely seated around the new thermostat, we're just going to pop it in there, make sure that the orientation is good, matches the original. And having cleaned up the face of the thermostat housing, we're just going to pop it back on there. Now actually this is where the lower bracket is extremely useful, because it puts a bit of pressure on the thermostat housing and keeps it in place, but you're still going to want to have the mounting bolts, or at least one of the mounting bolts, close to hand, so that you can physically fix the thermostat housing to the block. So I am going to be fitting all of the bolts and just tightening them by hand before I tighten them properly. So we'll speed you past the two mounting bolt fitments. Now the thermostat housing bolts, which are M8, they have a tightening torque of 22 Newton meters, which is 16 pounds square foot. That is basically hand tight. So you don't want to be putting any more pressure or any more torque on these than is absolutely necessary. Just do it up, a little nip up with the 1/4 inch driver. Do not use anything long handled on this, it's entirely unnecessary. Same process for the two bolts, one of which connects to the mounting bracket and the other of which holds a large earth. I'm going to do those up finger tight first and then attack them with the ratchet, but again extremely low on the torque setting. And we'll speed you through that because nobody's got time to watch a ratchet spinning. Now I've saved the best till last, so anybody who's ever had an earth fault or an earth problem in their car will know the pain that it can cause and how difficult it can be to track down. So whenever I'm removing an earth, I always like to try and clean it up before refitting it. So that's what I'm doing here. Again, it's the 00 gauge wire wool just to clean it up, get any corrosion on. This one's actually very clean, but every little helps. It's not going to do it any harm, so you might as well do it while you're there. In goes the 10mm bolt, and yeah, careful on the torque, no more than sort of 20 Newton meters, somewhere around there. Okay, so with that all buttoned down, we're now ready to fit the hose. Now, I always would prefer to fit it from the thermostat and work towards the front of the car. You might feel differently. That's the way I'm going. This is my car. You've got the pliers there working full time. They are extremely good, but there are some ways in which that clip can sort of snag on the way to being seated. So I'm using a screwdriver just to make sure that I'm levering it with the right amount of force and get it seated properly. You may need to do the same because you're not exactly spoiled for space when it comes to seating that clip. There's a lot of stuff going on in that area. Mainly a cooling union that I think leads to the turbocharger. Anyways, now we're all seated, can turn our attention to the front clip. Now I've made sure to get the pliers on the clip before I seat the hose. That is more habit than anything else, and I would advise you to do the same. It makes it a little bit easier. There is quite a lot of jiggling and pushing and moving around in order to get that hose to seat, but once it's on, it's clipped down nicely and it's not going anywhere. So at this stage we can start bolting things back together again, making sure that all of the intake pipe work is seated correctly and is tightened down. I'm not going to lie to you, it's a little bit difficult to do this one-handed, but I'm committed. As an aside, this intake pipe work is from Sebastian at TIG Pro. Definitely an upgrade that I would recommend, even just for the visual appeal. Okay, so we're at a point where we can top up the coolant. I know that I lost roughly 2.5 litres, so that's what we're going to fill it up with. Going to fill it up with 2 litres to start with, just to see where we're at. We're a little bit low, so going to fill it up a little bit more. And now that that's done, check that everything's buttoned down before we actually start the car for the first time. Make sure that the boost pipes are clipped back together again, that all connections are firm. By all means, give it a dad slap and say that's not going anywhere. Right, so we're back in the car. We're going to start it for the first time since fitting the new thermostat. This is probably quite a key one. We want to be monitoring the coolant temperature, but we also want to have a little look for leaks. So let's give it a start. There's no immediate warning for low coolant, which is always a good place to be. At this point you want to do a good visual check for any leaking coolant. You want to check the coolant level, check it isn't dropping. I've given the radiator hose, the top red hose, at least a good few squeezes just to make sure that we're actually pumping a little bit of coolant around. That does sort of help it circulate, but until that thermostat opens fully you're not going to be pushing all that much coolant around. Quick check of that hose and it is stone cold, or at least 17 degrees. So it appears as though that thermostat is no longer leaking, which is a great start. Other than the coolant that has already pulled from where I prized out the thermostat, I can't see any more is falling from it, so that means we've got a good seal there, but we want to run it for a little bit just to check that that is true. Just a quick check underneath the car to make sure that we haven't got any drips. Again, can't see anything there. At this point I'm going to top the coolant up to max and then put the cap on. Okay, so our temperature has climbed to 66 degrees, which you can see is about a quarter of the way up the gauge. The thermostat should not have opened at this point, so again a quick check of that pipe to make sure that it is, yes, it is still cool, so that is good, everything working well. And a quick check of the levels there, which are still showing max. Again, I wouldn't expect it to start dropping until that thermostat opens. We're now reaching 78, nearly 80 degrees. You can see that that's almost at the halfway marker. The thermostat itself won't open until the mid-80s, so we should still be feeling it as being cold. It is still feeling cold, but I can feel some heat transfer through from the thermostat, that's normal, but the coolant within the pipe itself is still cold, so the thermostat has not opened. And as expected, there has been no change to our coolant level. Okay, we are now at 85 degrees, give or take, and the analog gauge, as you can see, is right in the middle. But because we're comparing a digital readout here to an analog product that is opening, i.e. the thermostat, we're just going to do a double check. Obviously this is an 85 degree coolant that is coming out of that pipe. I can feel it's fairly warm and I can feel it flowing, so that indicates that the thermostat is open and is therefore functioning as expected. So we're at above 95 degrees now, which is where we'd expect to have the fans kick in. The great news is that they have, and so we will see the temperature dropping. This isn't something you'll be able to see on a standard display if you haven't got the open SID, but you can at least hear the fans kicking in. So with that done, it's a final check of coolant level, everything's checked out, and we are good to go. Now there is nothing to substitute a good proper road test, so that is exactly what I'll do, but I'm doing so the day after, so it's given the coolant some time to settle, and everything seems to be performing well. If you don't already have open SID, it is definitely worthwhile getting. But if you don't want to go ahead with remaps or anything like that, then you can always go and look at the eSID, which is available for the 9.5 and will provide you the same PID measurements. So hopefully this has been of help to you. Certainly it was a learning curve for me, that P0116 code. If you get it and you suspect a faulty temperature sender, do your thermostat at the same time. It really does make sense. As ever, thank you very much for watching. If you made it to the end, congratulations, well done. But yeah, if you have the opportunity to give a like, a follow, a subscribe, add anything to comments, I'd be very grateful for any interaction. Thank you as always.